Hey guys, welcome to the Brushpix YouTube channel. We are a comic book company that loves to talk about other mediums, including movies, TV shows, and video games. If you like any of those things, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon below. Hey Chi.
Hey Cyrus.
How you doing today?
Not too bad. How about you?
Excellent. So what do you want to talk about today?
Let's talk about the latest Transformers Siege.
Okay, yeah, I just watched that just 1 or 2 days ago.
Yeah, so did I.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things that I found most interesting about this new series was just the way in which they generated everything. You know, they did a lot of computer-generated work on it. I thought it looked pretty good overall. Yeah,
well, overall, I think it's one of the better-looking shows that came along a long time.
Sure.
Very high, production quality in the way it looks. The CG is very nicely done. Different color palettes, different scenes. Had a different set. They had different settings.
Yeah.
Different lightings, which makes it look very, very sophisticated.
Yes.
Maybe got some Netflix money.
Very likely. One of the things that was most interesting about the series to me, just in general, was I thought the pacing. At the very beginning, you're introduced to Bumblebee. You see him working sort of as a trader.
Yes.
And, he's sort of doesn't even want to be an Autobot at all. He doesn't want to take a side in the war, which I thought was pretty interesting. But then immediately you're hit with Starscream, and then he shows up, and then all of a sudden Optimus shows up after Megatron shows up. You're like, whoa, okay, this is a lot going in the first few minutes.
Well, here's the interesting thing is how they started out the show was how the original G1 started too.
Okay.
Yeah, the very first shot in the original Transformers was Bumblebee on Wheeljack looking for Energon.
Yeah.
So they kind of used that, paying a little tribute to that. Overall, I thought it was fine for what it is. Understand at the end of the day, they're creating this show to sell toys, So they depicted the character looking like the toys. And on that note, I think that is fine. Although the interesting things when you look on the internet, the fandom with Transformers kind of split in two. There are people who really like it, and there are people who absolutely hate it.
Okay, so why do some people dislike it?
The interesting thing to me is a lot of them bring up voice acting as a major part of it, which I thought it was okay. I personally thought there were aspects of it I was a little thrown off by it, to be honest. First of all, one of the things is that none of the original voices came back.
Yeah.
Although they had someone who did Optimus Prime that sounded like Optimus Prime, when they had someone who got the Starscream that's very similar too. They weren't the original actors at all. I think that was one of the controversies that's being kind of talked about.
Sure.
Well, among the fan group. Number two, personally, I would say a lot of what their gripe is that the characters are very, very toned down in the way they approach. A lot of times they all kind of speak almost on the same level without injecting a lot of excitement to voices.
Yeah. So
that was one thing I noticed too. And I think that was something people talked about. But personally, for me, I thought it was a little odd because it's like a show that was trying to pay tribute to the original Transformers G1. So they got somebody to do Optimus Prime's voice. They got somebody to do Starscream's voice, and a few other ones that I go, okay, that sounded pretty good. That's pretty familiar to what I'm used to. But then at the same time, there were other characters that sounded nothing like the original.
Like who then?
Ironhide.
Okay.
Ironhide sounded like a teenager, where the original he was kind of like an older guy. That you get the impression that he may even be older than Optimus Prime sometimes.
Yeah.
So they got a young kid's voice for that. Shockwave was another one. Shockwave originally had a very calm, smoothing voice, very, very, very toned down. Here they made him sound a little bit more like a maniacal, mad scientist.
Yeah.
But his character was shifted a little bit differently. So I go, okay.
I definitely got that vibe.
Yes.
And it actually played into the plot pretty well,
Sure.
I feel. And so I don't think it's terrible.
No, I don't think that's terrible. But the thing that kind of was weird to me was that if you're going to pay tribute, why not be a little bit more faithful to some of them?
Sure.
You can, because I thought to myself, you can even do Shockwave's voice sounding like a mad scientist, even just using the original, sound. You can just have the character speak a little bit slightly different in the way it handle its tones and notes, and I think that would have been fine too. Yeah. Another weird part about it is kind of like when you have characters like Optimus Prime and Starscream, they sound very cartoony.
Yes.
Even though they tone them down a little bit, they're still very much of a cartoon voice. Then you had characters, kind of like Bumblebee and Mirage,
They sounded more realistic.
more realistic.
More human.
So I thought there was a little jarring having these two in there. It wasn't consistent throughout.
I would agree.
Yeah, so the consistency was a little off to me. That was kind of what bothered me the most. It's like, okay, you're willing to go back and pre-tribute the G1, but it's very cartoony voices and very modern voices. It'd be kind of like the equivalent of taking Mickey Mouse voice and put it into Batman the Animated Series. And it's very jarring to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it had a little bit of that when I was watching it. I go, okay. What I thought was what really worked was Wheeljack's voice.
Yes.
Because they took the original voices. Somebody else is doing it now. But the original Wheeljack had more of a street voice. He was like a scientist type, but he wasn't your Rego scientist. He was like, oh yes, my boy, come here. Let me, show you what to do. He had a much more street type of, dialogue and speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So they kept that quality, but the modern voice also had a more realistic sound to it. I thought that was one of the better translation of taking a voice and modernizing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing that I thought was pretty entertaining about the show was just how outgunned I felt the Autobots were in this one.
Yes.
This was probably the most desperate I think I've seen everyone. Mm-hmm. And, Optimus during the entire time was having to worry about making sure they didn't have Energon.
Yes.
They had to worry about how they're going to defeat the Decepticons. And then on top of that, they're losing men all over the place. Yes. And so you could definitely feel the stakes.
Yeah. Well, the Autobots, I can see they're pretty fractured too. Where you can tell the characters like Ratchet, who's left already because of his own reason. And you have Bumblebee, who you knew was an Autobot, but never even joined them in the first place.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought that was okay, because we are doing a modern show. Characters needs to be, not so simple as the way it worked. Back then, you would see the Autobots, they're just a group of good old guys. They got kind of all friendly with each other. Now, they're kind of at odds, too, creating a little bit more conflict, which is, I think it's fine. And they did the same with the Decepticon sides as well. But my problem with the writing itself is that there was a lot of stuff that the characters reference. Kind of like, well, back then we were friends, you saved my life and stuff like that. And I felt like with 6 episodes...
It's not enough time.
Well, not even just that. I felt like with 6 episodes, you could have put that in there. You could have actually did more than this is the very last day of the war and both sides are desperate. I felt for 6 episodes, you may even be able to start from the very beginning where things were kind of nicer. Show when Cybertron was fine, the Autobots and the Decepticons were working together, and then something happened in between. You can do that in the first or 2 episodes, fraction the 2 party, and then they have their conflict going back and forth, and then the last 2 episodes depict the final days we have to escape. I felt like that probably would have been more interesting, because a lot of times they reference stuff and go, that sounds a little bit more exciting than what I'm watching on screen right now.
Sure.
Because a lot of the times characters are either just talking, walking, or sitting down and talking.
Yeah.
And I kind of go, you could have just, instead of referencing these stuff with dialogue, show the actual action that's happening.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a missed opportunity. But I don't know if that's because do a CG cartoon show, which will require more time and budget to pull that off, so they have to simplify it. Mm-hmm. Or the people in charge of the writing just never planned it that far in advance.
That would make sense, too.
Yeah.
When you look at everything that's going on between, what'd you call it? It was the Allspark, and they're looking for that.
Yes.
That was sort of interesting too.
That was interesting, but here's the thing. That became sort of a plot device that the whole series was running on. It kind of put them on the quest where they're going from location to location. Mm-hmm. But quite often when they get to a location, it doesn't really do much as a story development.
Thematically, it didn't really hold a lot of weight.
No. So that's why I kind of go, you could have shortened that to the last 2 episodes. Could have started out with like talking about the Allspark and all that, and then the middle 2 episodes, it's lost in the last, so they have to find it in the desperation.
Yeah.
Could have tightened it a little bit more, but pacing would have been off a little bit, because I think they wanted to go for a very subdued, almost kind of a depressing tone.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole series, but so if you're going to do that, then you had a much more up and down in what's trying to depict.
How do you feel about the powers that Bumblebee got in the movie? I mean, in the show.
I thought originally it was interesting, but he got and lost it. He literally got and lost in like 2 episodes, and without doing too much to it. So that's the weird stuff like that too, where you had characters like Ultra Magnus, who had a sort of a good introduction when he first showed up.
Yeah.
Was in conflict with Optimus Prime, decided to go talk to Decepticon. And then he was captured and got killed. without that character doing much, considering how important, not even just in terms of like G1 lore, who that character was, but even within the show, they introduced him as very, very important. I'm your battle commander. I'm the strategy guy. And his strategy was pretty poor, and he got caught and got killed.
Yeah.
See, that's the problem.
He just sort of threw in the white flag. Yeah. It's like, I'm done.
Yeah, so and it wasn't like he went there and negotiated and even had maybe a plan to overthrow Megatron in the process and create some more conflict in that. Not much. And
he didn't even take the shot.
He didn't even take a shot. So it was weird because they want to show, okay, he's an honorable character. But if you're so honorable, why do you betray Optimus Prime in the first place?
Good question.
See, weird stuff like that I notice when you watch these shows, and you kind of go, writing-wise, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
There are things they never tighten up.
And then the Guardians, I just sort of didn't know sort of how they
did. That falls into another tribute to the G1 series.
Yeah. Where
someone like me who watched it go, yes, the Guardians were referenced in the original show, and who they are were very clearly done. Here, because they were trying to pay tribute, and he just, you have Omega Supreme show up at the end just to kind of resolve the battle. Probably also another mishandling. If you did, like I said, if you did the show where they showed them back then when everything was at peace, you could have showed what the Guardians' real purpose were.
Yeah.
And it's maybe in the middle they were lost, and then finally one of them decides to come out and says, "No, I need to regain my purpose."
Yeah.
But here's something else interesting. Most of the characters in the show don't have an arc.
Yeah.
They don't have an arc. Optimus Prime is who he was. There's no change at the end. Megatron's who he was. Didn't change at the end. The only one that probably got a bit of an arc is Bumblebee.
I would agree.
And maybe Jetfire.
Jetfire. He changed, but I don't quite know what to make of the change.
Yeah, because the motivation wasn't that clear.
Yeah.
He was still willingly hunting down Autobots.
Yes.
But they want to say he has honor, but the honor part didn't really come through that well either, the way it's depicted.
Because he was the leader of the Seekers.
He was actually in the show, in the new show, yes. But in the original one, he was just another character.
Right.
They were trying to group them together and I guess do some character development going from a bad guy's side to a good guy's side.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't clearly mapped out.
Sure.
Which is another problem I had. Is like a lot of characters have motivations, but they weren't very clear where they really are from going from point A to point B. Even Megatron, where he first showed up, he was like, "We must crush your Autobots." Mm-hmm. And then when they were talking about, torturing Ultra Magnus, and then even reformatting them all to become Decepticons, he was hesitant on that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of weird. The character will flip a little bit.
So even if you remember at the first episode, he didn't want to kill Bumblebee at the beginning. He wanted to give him an opportunity to join.
Sure. But I can understand that because there's desperation in the war. Yes. You don't want to keep losing people. And he didn't know who this was. He goes, okay, maybe we can use this guy. So I can understand a little bit. To be honest, I thought the first episode was good. I thought the last episode was good. I just thought in between, sometimes the show meandered a little bit, and the character motivation was either flipping back and forth or not too clearly depicted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that really comes down to writing. Mm-hmm. I think that's somewhere in there. They probably had the idea of what they want to do overall, but because there's multiple characters and they have to feature, it gets lost a little bit in the shuffle.
Well, in the original show, the characters were a little bit more simple.
Yes.
And so they were far easier to be able to write from beginning to end.
Yes.
But when you're creating more complex characters like this, and you have a lot of them,
yes,
you sort of have to have more episodes, or you have to be far better at your writing.
Sure. Your writing has to take up a notch. Just kind of like I said, maybe you want to show the peaceful time that leads to the wartime.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of feeling like, ooh, things really got bad. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, you could do it in 6 episodes. And there are a lot of cartoons that can achieve that. So I thought that was kind of missed opportunity.
Well, one good example of that's also on Netflix, and this is a show that I personally loved, was Castlevania.
Oh, yes.
Awesome. Honestly, genuinely a pretty great show to watch. Mm-hmm. And at the very beginning, you sort of get a chance to sort of meet Dracula. You sort of feel for who he is. You find out that he has a wife, and you sort of get a chance to sort of see that first interaction.
Yeah.
And then you see how she dies, and you're like, oh, I see. Oh, yeah. This is dramatic. And so then everything that happens subsequently afterwards, you understand where he is, where he comes from. And then all the characters that they introduce afterwards are sort of built off of this premise.
Yes, I agree with you. See, but that's why with, War for Cybertron Siege, it was a little weird because no character really did that much of a jump in their development.
Yes.
It was just kind of like sequence happening, and we're just moving chess pieces, from places to places, and then the story just kind of ends.
Yeah.
So I think that's why that's why a lot of the fans were kind of like, okay, what the heck in the world I'm watching here, as opposed to if you watch the original Transformers cartoon, G1 cartoon. The first 3 parts had a very clear narrative.
Yes.
Episode 1, they talked about, things are desperate, so we got to go find energy somewhere else on another planet. They left, crash landed on Earth, revived on Earth, all happened in the first 15 minutes. Then met the humans, got into conflict with Decepticon, and then episode 2 was just each side trying to outsmart the other, trying to overcome the difficulties on this foreign terrain. And the final episode was them trying to have it all out, and then maybe go back to Cybertron. Yeah. So you talk about 3 episodes that did all of that very quickly.
I agree. If you look at the pacing here, it was a little bit weird for me.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't understand why they decided to turn the machine on that would move the cube from one area to another through space.
Yeah.
To another planet. I don't know why they even turned that on until they were absolutely ready for it.
Sure. Well,
like, things like that, I'm like,
Well, even the motivation was very weird, because they're like, well, Megatron must not get his hands on it.
So why take it off the planet?
But he said, we got to take it off the planet. But you kind of the weird part about that plan is that they say, okay, if you remove it, Cybertron's going to be dead. They talk about it over and over. And Optimus Prime still wants to do it. And you kind of go, what is the clear reason to do this? But all that is because they have Transformer lores they got to follow, which was depicted in the Michael Bay movie. Yes, the Allspark is lost from Cybertron, so we must find it. So they have to follow that procedure in where it's leading to. And to be honest, if you're doing a brand new series, you could do whatever you want with that. You may not have to have the old spark be off the planet. What if you just activated that and something else goes on? Probably would have been more interesting. So I think that's probably why, there's people who like it for a very simple reason. It is bringing back some of the characters you're familiar with. They are selling toys. It looks very good. It looks, without any doubt, it's one of the better looking Transformer series.
I agree.
It looks high budget. It looks like a cinematic movie. Has stuff that's like a modern show that people can relate to. The way the characters move, and they try to, the way they talk and they move, and the way they depict some scenario is very modern.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they were trying to put in old stuff to get the OG1 fans. That, I think, created sort of a hip butting in a lot of the sequences that's going on.
Right.
Yeah. Because there's even a sequence that I even thought was weird. Like when Starscream finally became the leader of the Seekers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you have Soundwave and Shockwave kind of shaking their head.
Like, are you serious?
Which is fine for a fan who's familiar with the series. But I always think, well, if you have a guy who's watching it for the very first time, nowhere in those episodes earlier do you think Starscream is incapable of leading the Seekers. That's interesting if you think about that.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense. I'm familiar with the character from other shows, so that would make sense.
That's why you go, okay, I can see why they're ragging on. But if you watch the show itself and pay attention, there is absolutely no reason why an audience would think that character is not fit to do it. Because a lot of his ideology was correct. He felt Skyfire was too weak. He felt Megatron was not going all out. Yeah, he was a lot more ruthless. So you kind of go, why do you throw a scene where they kind of shake their head? Because the show itself didn't tell you that they get any of that impression from.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of the little things I pick up on, because I'm a writer, so I write and I kind of go, those are things I probably wouldn't have done. Sure, you're paying a little tribute to the fans, anyone who's familiar with Transformers kind of get that idea. But anyone who watches for the first time will be kind of like, why is that? And that, I think, is one of the problems with the show, is that it relies a lot on the old Generation 1 crutches, but not realizing how to put these crutches at the right place to prop it up.
Right. Yeah. It's different from an Easter egg where it's almost hidden and you can either catch it or you don't. Mm-hmm. These are things that are sort of baked into the plot and the way in which these characters are portrayed.
Yes.
Which means that you sort of have to have the foundation there to really understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you look... Okay, let's take an example that's a little different.
Yeah.
Spider-Man Homecoming, for example.
Yes.
We didn't see Uncle Ben die that time, but they sort of still...
hinted that it happened. And some sort of tragedy that occurred that led him to where it is. which I think is fine.
Yes.
Because it doesn't go directly into what happens to the story all that much.
Sure. But we also are far more aware of that story and
Yes.
the backstory related to that compared to Starscream
Yes.
and sort of how he relates to everyone else.
Well, you have a major story point where a character who kind of took control of power that he always wanted.
Yes.
Here's the weird thing. He wanted to take control and have the power. He got it. Didn't really do much with it. If you think about it, he just commanded them to do attacks and stuff like that. Nothing really changed. It wasn't like, oh boy, now he took power. Either they got better or things got worse.
Mm-hmm. So, or he's more ruthless, or making decisions that the other guy wouldn't have made.
Yes, just started wiping out Autobots like they were, scraps.
Yes.
So they didn't have that either. So that's where I think the writing is weak. Where you do these things, which major character turning point. No real consequences shown. Interesting stuff like that I caught. So I can understand why there are people who dislike the show as well. Because general, even overall as writing, got to be a little bit more careful with that.
Right. But overall, I didn't hate it. I thought there were some really excellent things that happened in the show. Yeah. There are definitely a lot of positives.
Sure.
It's not ugly.
No.
I'll still take this over a show that just totally disrespects the fans and what
source material and threw it completely out.
Yes.
Overall, I liked it. I watched it. I watched it in one shot. And originally, I was just going to watch an episode, and I go, okay, well, let's keep going, see where it's going.
Yeah,
see what's happening.
The pacing is good enough to where you can watch all 6 rather easily. Yeah, I'm excited to watch chapter 2 and 3.
Sure, I'm hoping they can fix up some of these problems. Maybe hear some of the feedback and go, okay. It doesn't have to change your overall plan, but just tighten up the screws a little bit. Watch out for little stuff like that. That's kind of what we talked about. I've already watched like some of the episodes like twice already, just to kind of get an idea. Okay, maybe my first impression wasn't right. Let me watch it the second time and take it a little bit more. So the show is fairly easy to sit through any problem, and that's good.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like, ooh, that was tedious, and it's, my God, I can't believe it's so hard to sit through a cartoon now. So I think that was fine.
Right, that never happened.
That never happened. Yeah.
So overall,
overall,
I'll give it good marks. I think they can do a lot more with it. But guys, we definitely want to hear what you think down below in the comment section. Let us know how you felt about the show, what things you thought were good, and what things you thought could be improved on. And also let us know, definitely, if you intended on watching chapter 2 and 3.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So we can talk about it more next time.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Thanks, guys, for watching.
Bye-bye.